Welcome to the Hockey Hub podcast here on Nesson. I'm Dale Arnold, in for Adam Pellerin, coming to you from the birthplace of America, Plymouth, Massachusetts, where the winds are howling today. Judd Sirott and the rest of the Bruins contingent have continued on their merry way and have made their way to Seattle, site of Thursday night's game between the Bruins and the Seattle Kraken. Judd, good to see you, whatever amount of sleep you're operating under here today.
Oh, that's okay, Dale. You know, this is part of the rock and roll lifestyle that we lead, but great to get a chance to shoot the breeze with you.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. What I wasn't looking forward to was the start of the 5-game road trip on Tuesday night. The Bruins, to quote Brad Marchand, got the wheels beat off them by the Winnipeg Jets, 8-1 the final score. Not exactly the way you want to start the 5-game road trip.
No, I love that you're channeling Paul Bissonnette in that
Yeah.
interview and what happened to him. But no, you know, and Dale, when I think about it, so Brick and I roll through the open that Z puts together for us. And one of the things we talk about is why the Bruins were successful under Joe Sacco since the change. They had been 7-2 because primarily they had gotten back to their foundation. They'd been a stingy team. They had been hard to play against. That was not the case last night. And I think certainly watching the first 20 minutes, and then to see the way that the game unfolded for the rest of the 40, it made me start to think of the first 20 games for the Bruins during the course of the year. And the other thing, Dale, listen, you've been in the business for an eternity. I think, I think you were in the business before the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth. But,
Yikes.
sorry. I think one of the things, that you've heard over the years, this is a measuring stick game. And I'm sure sometimes there had to be times you rolled your eyes. And a lot of times, because you hear it quite a bit across an 82-game season, and there are not 82 measuring stick games. But I think for the Bruins, it did apply, and this trip applies. So you felt so good about what you did across those first 9 games since the coaching change. All right, now you're heading on the road. You're going to face maybe the best team you're going to face on the road trip. How do you fare? And it didn't go well for the Bruins. Now, that said, you've got 4 other games remaining on the trip, which will take place next in Seattle, as you mentioned. And while that's not a team that's currently in the playoff structure, it's difficult situations. You're going to have to deal with the travel, the time change, and a team that's certainly playing a lot better. And then how does it fare as you continue to roll around? Because I think what everybody's really interested in is, okay, you got off to that great start. Can you sustain it? And what does it look like against some of the better teams in the league?
Well, your partner, Andy Brickley, after the loss Tuesday night in Winnipeg, spoke to head coach Joe Sacco, and Joe was succinct and direct with his analysis of what happened.
Joe, third period notwithstanding, what was the difference in your mind in tonight's hockey game?
I just think they were the better team tonight from start to finish. I thought we killed an early penalty, which, but then after that, we started to play okay after that, but then the game got away from us, and we just lost to a better team tonight from start to finish.
How concerned are you? Is this just 1 out of 82? Some nights you just don't play well, some nights it doesn't go your way, but you got here winning 7 out of the last 9, and it was goaltending, team defense, penalty killing. It wasn't there tonight. Are you just going to burn the tape, or how do you approach it?
Yeah, we'll see. I think that it's not the start of the road trip that we wanted, but we'll look at some things. We'll correct some areas that need fixing, like we always do, and we'll just get back at it tomorrow in practice.
Thanks for your time, Joe.
Okay.
Jed, let me turn Andy's question around on you. Was the game Tuesday night in Winnipeg just 1 of 82? One of those nights happens to every team in every professional sport? Or was it something a bit more concerning long-term for you?
I have a hard time saying that this is 1 of 82, burn the tape, and let's move on. And that's why I think practice that the Bruins are going to stage in Seattle before they face off against the Kraken is really one that bears watching. Because in the first 20 games, the Bruins, this is what they experienced. And I had a chance to see some of those both at home and on the road, how they practiced leading into some of those games and what the response was like. I can think back early in the season. So the Bruins had a dreadful performance against the Utah Hockey Club. And they had a very loud practice under then head coach Jim Montgomery at the Delta Center leading into Nashville. So how would they play? And they ended up getting skunked on that trip. Now, UC Saros was terrific in that game, but the Bruins ended up 1-1-1, and I don't think played to the level that they wanted to. So how do they respond? Because in many ways, you talk to a lot of different guys when the coaching change was made. Okay, why are the Bruins better? What's different? And one of the things Jeremy Swayman talked about, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about Brad Marchand's comments, he said that our practice habits have gone way up, and that's translated to the games. Well, that was certainly not the case last night. I think, you're sitting there with Billy Jaffe and Andrew Raycroft, and you're having a chance to slow the game down and take a look at it. There are a lot of issues, both coverage-wise, puck management, timing, penalties, all those things that really were issues for the Bruins in the first 20 games. Well, they cropped up last night in Winnipeg.
As I was watching it, I was thinking about the inability to deal with adversity. An early penalty called to Trent Frederic that he deserved, interference minor, a double minor to Brandon Carlo that he deserved. They give up, that second goal in the period. It goes from a 1-0 game. If you escape the first period 1-0, you think, okay, we can survive this thing. It goes to 2-0, and then the wheels started to fall off the wagon a little bit.
Definitely, and Dale, that's something that the general manager, Don Sweeney, had talked about when he sort of assessed those first 20 games before he made the coaching change, that the Bruins had a hard time both in game and from game to game dealing with adversity. And a lot of what we saw last night is completely emblematic of what we saw in the first 20 games. So how do you deal with that? You're going to deal with that during the course of a year. Every team has to be able to manage a game, to your point. So you get through the Trent Frederic penalty in the first minute. You're able to manage the game. You start to actually play pretty well. Connor Hellebuyck had to make some great saves in that opening 20 minutes, especially in that segment right after Frederic took the penalty. You killed it off, and before Brandon Carlo took the double minor. And to Brick's point, I think one of the things he talked about after the Jets scored and got the goal from Nemesnikov to get on the board, the Bruins had a hard time responding. Their play just wasn't the same way that you saw in the opening 20 minutes before the double minor. Now, it's not easy. The Jets have momentum. They may have started sluggishly, and they generated a little bit of energy as a result. But you have to manage your way through this. And one of the things I love, Dale, is that we had a chance to go through a pre-show call. And it makes you start to think. Connor Hellebuyck, to go back to him, he made some great stops in that opening 20 minutes. And I don't know, one of the things that we're going to have to talk about on one of the podcasts going forward is how you prepared for games or how you did games. Well, I keep this silly notepad, so I take notes that nobody can read except me. And I went back and looked, and I'm looking at the saves that Hellebuyck made in the first period. He made one on Lindholm. He made a great stop on McLaughlin backdoor. Marshy had a couple chances in that first 20 minutes. But what I really don't see on that first period sheet is a stop from Swayman. And granted, a lot of the saves and a lot of the looks that the Jets got, and this is a pretty good offense. I think they're very underrated around the National Hockey League. They got a lot of grade A looks. But I think you needed some saves from Swayman that you got from Connor Hellebuyck that could have helped the game for the Bruins.
Well, after the 8-1 loss on Tuesday night, the captain, Brad Marchand, accountable as always, stood there and answered some of the tough questions after the game.
This is coming. Our practices have been sloppy. Our execution's been off there. And it bleeds into games. The way you practice is how you play. Starts there, and we haven't been good enough. So we need to do a better job at being good in practice, and that'll translate to games.
PK had a hard night tonight. You thinking in that context, the work part of it?
No, I wouldn't say PK. They're a very good power play. We didn't, we gave up a lot of seams and holes on the power play, on the penalty kill. And they capitalized, but we were worse 5-on-5.
A night where you feel for your goaltender in there for Asian?
Not really. I mean, everyone had a bad night. He's part of it. He's not singled out. I don't think anyone can look at themselves in the mirror and say that they had a good game. So he's part of the group. He's part of the bad loss.
Judd, we'll talk more about Jeremy Swayman in the next segment, but let's go back to the first comments that Brad made there about you could see this coming. Practice habits had gotten a little sloppy. You go to a lot of practices. Were you seeing some of this yourself?
Well, it was difficult to see because Dale, I actually went back, and I think, by the way, Marshy is spot on, as he always is, the captain of the Bruins. So I went back and I started to think. So after the Bruins won the Centennial game 6-3 over the Montreal Canadiens, they had an optional practice on Monday. I did go to that. Jeremy Swayman was at that practice, and we had a long conversation, which I'm happy to relay at some point because we talked a lot about some of the global issues that are going on with the team and with him. So that was an optional, but then follow it up. Start to think back, and this is where I think Marchand is coming from. The Bruins were not great against the Detroit Red Wings, which was understandable. You're coming off a massive game in the Centennial game, and there was all sorts of emotion in the building. There was going to be a drop-off, but the Bruins found a way to win. Okay, so now you head on the road, difficult travel, time change. You play against the Blackhawks. They got off to a sluggish start in that game. Joe Sacco made a couple of line changes. Marchand and Geekie scored twice. They started to really elevate their play. They outworked the Blackhawks. They deserved that win, overcoming a sluggish start. So then they had a day off. But I think where Marchand is talking about are these two practices in particular. Friday, heading into Philadelphia, they weren't great against the Flyers. They had to rally from 3-1 down after an early 2-0 deficit to win that game in overtime. So you win that game, you've got Sunday off. Monday you practice before you leave for the Jets. And that was a practice I did not have a chance to attend. But I think if there were two things that Marchand is probably pointing to, it's those two full practices leading into Philadelphia and then leading into this game against the Jets. Because what we saw yesterday, how loose they were, how slow they were, and a lot of this was 5-on-5. Yes, the Jets were able to score a couple of times on the power play. This was a vast departure from what we had seen across the first 9 games under Joe Sacco, which, if you really look at it, the 2 games they lost, they could have easily won. One of them was against Vancouver, where Kevin Lankinen basically stole the game in that one, and it was virtually a 1-0 game until the very tail end when Connor Garland scored an empty net goal. But those habits, the way they need to play, and Marchand's talked about it, the entire team has talked about it, there's a certain way that they have to play on a night in, night out basis, the way they're constructed in order to be successful. We didn't see that last night in Winnipeg.
Well, Wednesday's full practice in Seattle before Thursday's game against the Kraken could tell a lot for this team the rest of this 5-game road trip. When we come back in just a couple of minutes, we'll talk about Jeremy Swayman. You heard Brad Marchand talk about him a little bit as well. Judd is in Seattle. I'm here in Plymouth. You're watching the hub of hockey. And if you like what you hear, then make sure to like and subscribe to the show. Hockey Hub can be found on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and wherever else podcasts are found. Judd Sirott joining us from Seattle. I'm Dale Arnold, in for Adam Pellerin from Plymouth, Massachusetts. Let's talk about Jeremy Swayman. Brad Marchand is always honest and direct. He was handed a softball to kind of take Swayman off the hook for the 8-1 loss in Winnipeg, and he wasn't going to swing at it. He said, nope. He wasn't very good either. I'm paraphrasing now. None of us were very good, but he deserves part of the blame as well. Jeremy Swayman gave up a career-high 8 goals. This year, so far, he's given up 8 in a game. He's given up 7 in Dallas. He gave up 6 earlier in the year. We thought we saw Jeremy Swayman kind of rounding into form a little bit. Was this a regression or one of those nights?
I think that's one of the things that makes the Seattle game so interesting, Dale, if he heads back in net. And that's one of the things that we're going to have to find out, and we'll know a little bit more about once we head to practice, whether or not that's going to be Jonas Korpisalo. But we're going to see Jeremy Swayman again. No question about it. My guess, if it's not in Seattle, and he's a guy who likes to play every single game, he's definitely going to be playing in Vancouver. But I think, and Brad Marchand is exactly right, I think you win as a team and you lose as a team. And Swayman also didn't take himself off the hook after the game. His quotes, got to stay sharp for 60 minutes. Some of the goals that I let in, I know I can stop. And when you let those in, I basically did not play to my standard. And then going back to something that we talked about earlier here on the podcast is that the saves that Connor Hellebuyck made in the first period, when the game was still very much in doubt, it was a scoreless game at that point. Those are the saves. And granted, there were grade A looks that the Bruins allowed. Could you have gotten a high-end save or two in response? And what type of impact would that have made in the game? For Jeremy Swayman, to go back to the conversation that I had with him on Monday, Dale, I think sometimes we forget how young he is. And two, he's in a different situation this year than he has been in the past. He is the number one goaltender. He's not sharing the net. It's not 1A, 1B with Linus Ullmark. So that's different. Now, and Swayman, again, is a guy who wants to play every single night. And one of the guys that he talks about is Connor Hellebuyck, who wants to play every single night. So if that's the case, and you can have a conversation with Andrew Raycroft about this, and I've talked with Razor about this, so how do you manage your game between games in order to be at your best? And I think that that's something he's still finding out. And one of the things that he's finding out is he has to continue to work all the time. That's why he participated in the Monday optional practice. He didn't have to. They won the game. He was terrific against the Montreal Canadiens. Did not have to be on the ice as a guy who's looking forward to play 65. But I think what he's understanding is I have to put in the work in order to be successful. I expect that he's going to be a spirited participant in the practice in Seattle. And that's one of the things that he is finding out about his game as he learns to become a number one goaltender around the National Hockey League.
The Winnipeg game kind of got away from the Bruins' 5 third-period goals. He had given up 3 in the third period when the 3 fights occurred and things kind of got a little crazy out there. Were you surprised Joe Sacco left him in for all 8?
Good question. I did start to think about that at one point. And in going back and looking at the goals, and the timing of them. First of all, the last 2 came 10 seconds apart at 16:16 and 16:26, the Appleton and Chibrikov goals. Could you have taken him out after the Velarde goal? I suppose. Then you go shorthanded. I follow scores on the tip. But I think it's certainly a valid question. But I think the last 2 goals came so quick that it probably, if he was thinking about hooking him at that point, it's like, okay, I'm just going to ride this out. There's no sense in throwing in Joonas Korpisalo for the last 3+ minutes of regulation at that point. But I certainly think it's a valid thing to bring up.
It'll be interesting to see how the Bruins handled the goaltender situation for the Thursday game in Seattle. My first instinct was you're going to play Korpisalo anyway, especially after what happened Tuesday. But I can see Swayman lobbying goalie Bob and Joe Sacco. No, let me get back in there. Let me get back on the horse here.
Oh, I'm sure that's definitely going to be the case. He's gonna lobby after every loss. It doesn't matter if it's close or lopsided or he had really sparkled. But listen, across a trip like this, and this is why goalie Bob and Joe Sacco are good at what they do, and Bob Essenza in particular, I think that he understands how the position has to be managed, especially across a segment of the season like this. Joonas Korpisalo has been pretty good for this team. He's kind of gone under the radar. Heading into last night's action, he was 6th in the league in goals against average with a .909 save percentage and a 5-2-1 record. And one of those losses, that was when Kevin Lankinen stood on his head at the other end of the ice. He's been very good and very reliable for you. He's done exactly what you want, especially from a backup goaltender. He's given you a chance to win every single night. So I'll be interested to see what goaltender they choose to start. If you ask me to go on FanDuel and bet, I'm going to say Korpisalo. Give Swayman an opportunity to get in the work today, get in the work tomorrow, get in the work on Friday before you face off in Vancouver. Give Korpisalo, who's played very well and certainly deserves an opportunity to face the Kraken.
Interested to get your thoughts on the third period fights that the Bruins were involved with. It seemed clear to me the Winnipeg Jets were really upset with Trent Frederick. He fought with Gustafsson, who had never had a fight in his entire hockey career, and one punched him with a shot to the chin. Then you had Kastelik, who kind of, I think, had to kind of take on the biggest guy on the ice. For me, it was when Adam Lowry and Nikita Zadorov decided, okay, one more here. That was Lowry saying, I'm the captain of this team. I'm going to stand up for my guys. And quite frankly, I don't think the Bruins gained anything from the fighting anyway.
Well, I'd like to go back and actually watch what transpired before Frederick dropped the gloves with Gustafsson, because Trent Frederick's a really honest player. And David Gustafsson obviously doesn't have to take the fight. It didn't look like to me Freddie just grabbed him and I'm going to drop the next guy closest to him. That's typically not how Trent Frederick is wired. In fact, when I've talked to him in the past, Dale, and I'm sure you've had these conversations with him, because people would ask, why aren't you dropping the gloves more often? And he'll say, I'm always willing, but not always, but someone has to be willing to engage with me. So again, I'd have to go back and watch and see, did he ask Gustafsson or did he not give him a choice? And my thought is he probably asked him. And for a guy he's barely been in the lineup, he's trying to stay in the lineup, that maybe he decided to say yes to Trent Frederick. But I don't know that for sure. So it's hard to say. For Mark Kastelik, if you had gone back and watched, and you could see this during the previous TV timeout, he was barking at a lot of guys on the Jets bench. And I went back and I listened a little bit to Kevin Sawyer, who was a tough guy who played briefly for the Bruins. And one of the things he mentioned is, I think Kastelik wanted this earlier in the game, but nobody took him up on the opportunity. So he decided it was time for he and Stanley to go at it at that point. And for Adam Lowry, I love Adam Lowry. I think he's one of the best captains around the National Hockey League. And I think he's one of the reasons that the Jets have such a good culture in Winnipeg and why they've been consistently a pretty good team. He wanted that. There's a little bit of a size advantage there for Zadorov, but he's not a guy who backs down. So, the Bruins, they had a chance to vent some of their frustration. And I like the way both teams really stood up for themselves late in the game.
And one other point on the Kastelik fight. I think that went back to the shot that David Pastrnak took in the first period, up around the head area from that player. And I think that's why Kastelik was doing the barking earlier. And I think that's why he took advantage of the opportunity to answer for it there.
I think you're bang on, Dale. I think you're absolutely bang on. And going back, and I want to be very clear, I don't think the Bruins lost the game because of the way it was officiated. I want to be clear on that. But here's where I'll go with this, and I'm curious, whether Billy Jaffe or Andrew Raycroft had talked about it. If you have a question about a call, there are now tools and rules that allow the officials to go back and get a second look. There's an opportunity to do it, and you can completely wipe the penalty off the board. So in that situation, and clearly the Bruins didn't feel like the call that was initially issued by the referee at the time on David Pastrnak, when they thought it was Pasternak's stick that drilled Logan Stanley. You had the opportunity. All you got to do is just say, ruling on the ice is a double minor. We're going to review it. That's all you have to do. But they did not take the time to confer. Like, hey, do the Bruins have a beef? Maybe I want to reanalyze this call. And I wish for a different outcome there. Do I think it would have changed the game? No. But I wish in that instance, again, very isolated, that the officials would take the time to do as they say to get it right.
Judd's in Seattle, where the Bruins continue their 5-game road trip against the Seattle Kraken. We'll talk more about the rest of this trip as we continue. For more on the Bruins and the biggest trending news in the sports world, check out Boston Has Entered the Chat, hosted by George Balekshi and Travis Thomas. Available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and wherever else podcasts are found. We continue on here on the Hockey Hub podcast. Judd Sirott, voice of the Bruins, is in Seattle. The Bruins continue their 5-game road trip. Thursday night, they're in Seattle to take on the Kraken, a team that, as you stated previously, just outside the playoff picture at the moment. Then Saturday, they go to Vancouver to take on the Vancouver Canucks, and old friend Jake DeBrusk is out there. Danton Heinen is there as well. As tough as the loss was on Tuesday night, it sort of doubles the importance of the Thursday night game in Seattle.
Oh, definitely. I mean, Dale, you've been on plenty of these babies. Um, you know, you got to be careful because, as this trip rolls on, it gets a little bit tougher. And the way you end it, remember, you're going to end with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And I understand they have not gotten off to the start that they wanted, but they're starting to pick it up. They won again here last night. You're facing a Calgary team that's been really good at home. I know the Vancouver Canucks have struggled on home ice, but they recently got a big infusion with Thatcher Demko and JT Miller kind of back in the fold for this team. And that's why a game against Seattle, in so many ways, it's big, baby. How do you respond? How do you play across that 60 minutes? Yes, you want the right result. But I think for the Bruins, going back to one of the conversations that we were having earlier, in the first 9 games, they deserved those wins. They absolutely earned those wins. In the first 20 games, and they won only 8 of them, I don't know, there was a few where it's like, hey, they were able to sneak in out in overtime, or they were able to grab some extra points. And some of the losses that they had, it was hard walking out of the building thinking to yourself, oh, you know what, I think they deserve better. So let's see how the Bruins dig in against Seattle. Deal with the time change, deal with the loss, and are they able to get back to the things that made them successful in those first 9 games, being stingy, playing hard to play against. And because here's the other thing, Dale, I think that started to crop up, like the offense is starting to pick up. I think lost in the game against the Jets, David Pastrnak scored on the power play. That's the first time it's happened since October 26th. And the Bruins, in their limited looks on the man advantage, it looked a lot better. That's encouraging for this team, especially on the road, because you know how a power play in many ways on the road can help you generate momentum, which is much more difficult to do when you're away from your home building. So that's a good sign for the team. But in the big picture, how do you play as 5-man units? How do you play 5-on-5? And if they check in the way that they did in the first 9 games, they're going to have pucks more, and it's going to give them some more opportunities to score.
We talked about the goaltending decision for Joe Sacco. Part of the information that he's dealing with on this is that the Bruins and Kraken played back on November 3rd. Bruins won the game 2-0, and Jeremy Swayman had his only shutout of the season against them.
He did. I think that those are all the factors that you're going to kind of wheel in, and this is what makes goalie Bob so good at what he does. He'll take a look at the big picture and think about what a goaltender did against an opponent. When's the last time Korpisalo played? How does he look against their version of offense and their version of shooters? Where are we during the course of the season? I think, Dale, because you're a guy that's also done baseball as well as hockey, the way I look at goaltending coaches, I look at them like pitching coaches, because most managers have no idea about pitching and a lot of the decision making, and that's changed a little bit with some of the rules, but nevertheless, I think how to correct guys, or when to throw guys in certain innings, or when to take them out of certain innings, what matchups are better. A lot of managers in baseball, they're going to leave that to the pitching coach. And if you talk to head coaches around the National Hockey League, and other than Patrick Waugh, I can't think off the top of my head of another head coach who's a former goaltender around the National Hockey League. There aren't a lot of them. Most head coaches, they're like, I leave this to the goaltending coach, because all I know is I know what they look like as a shooter. I don't know anything about the technical aspects of the game. And goalies, listen, they speak a different language than the rest of the players. You can ask Razor about that one. And that's what makes goalie Bob so good at what he does, being able to communicate and at the same time bringing the best out of who his goaltending tandem is.
Let's talk about Vancouver for a minute. Old friend Jake DeBrusk has been ablaze of late. 10 goals, 12 points in his last 9 games. Uh, Everybody in Boston who knew Jake DeBrusk liked him. He got a great ovation from the fans when the Canucks were back in Boston. It's nice from his perspective to see things going well for him.
No, terrific. Listen, all the best to Jake DeBrusk. Terrific kid, wonderful person, great family, and he's off to a great start. He's got 13 goals in the first 27 games. He is a streaky scorer. He had some good years with the Bruins, and there are a couple of games in particular with Jake DeBrusk that really stand out. Dale, I don't know what it is for you. One of them is going to be Fenway Park, where he scores 2 goals. The Bruins come from behind against the Penguins, and we find out after the game he's got a busted leg and a busted hand. That was a quality performance. And then Jake always seemed to elevate his game in the playoffs. The game winner in Game 7 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. How many big goals did he take? And at the same time, he took a lot of punishment. I can think of a cross-check to the head from Nazem Kadri that he got during the course of that game. But terrific things for Jake DeBrusk. You know, I know Donnie Sweeney, when he had talked about the extension for Jake DeBrusk, and I think it was before we approached July 1st and before the end of the regular season, I think the words that he uses, we took an aggressive position with Jake. I think they would have loved to have had him back, but what he was able to get on the open market wasn't going to be something that the Bruins were going to be able to match. And they had other needs that they needed to address. So Jake's off to a great start. The Bruins are going to have to contend with him, one of the most dynamic players in last year's Norris Trophy winner, in Quinn Hughes, who's a really good player. You know what's funny is Elias Pettersson is a star player around the National Hockey League, but against the Bruins, he seems, you don't often notice him in those games, but he's a really good player. And I'm sure that Rick Tocchet has that group trying to figure it out on home ice so they can improve their standing in the Pacific Division in the Western Conference.
You mentioned Thatcher Demko previously, a Vezina Trophy finalist, one of the best goaltenders in the National Hockey League, just recently made his season's debut. Wouldn't be a bit surprised if the Bruins see him on Saturday in Vancouver.
No, not at all. Especially playing against a team, he played college hockey, obviously, in the area. But for Thatcher Demko, it was a weird injury that he experienced. So apparently it was a muscle in his knee. And I think that the way I read it was that it's rare for hockey players to have this type of an injury, but it controls the stability of the knee. And he actually experienced it last year. You know, if you remember, the Vancouver Canucks went on that run, and I think Thatcher Demko played 1 game. And then Casey DeSmith played 3 more, and they went with their third guy, Artur Shilovs, and they went deep into the second round. They took the Edmonton Oilers to a Game 7 where the Oilers were ultimately able to prevail. But he's one of the best goaltenders around the National Hockey League. You're going to see he and Jeremy Swayman going head-to-head in that contest. And Hockey Night in Canada, baby. Staying up late. Stay up late, Dale. You know, you came back. You know, why didn't you come back for some afternoon games on the East Coast rather than
I was wondering.
staying up
I was
late
wondering
for Vancouver?
about that. What the heck? I'll sleep when I retire again eventually. There's some things in hockey that you just can't explain, and the Vancouver Canucks record is one of them. They're 10-2-1 on the road, and yet at home they're a pedestrian hockey team.
Well, there are, and I think the other thing, Dale, and I'm sure you've seen it for years around the NHL, that sometimes there are a few built-in things at home that you have to deal with that sometimes teams have a hard time processing, at least early in the season, where, especially if your team isn't scoring or playing up to the way that they want. Well, the fans, and certainly the fans in Vancouver, they're going to get on that team. And then you head away from Vancouver. You don't have to deal with any distractions. And it's just the team unto itself. And because of that, I think they're able to play a little bit differently. But it's hard to tell. We'll get an opportunity, when we head out there to Vancouver to see what they look like on home ice. I guarantee they're going to be fired up to play against the Bruins. They were not very good in the first game in Boston. There was just one guy, and I think Rick Tocchet's comments, I'm sure you saw it after the game. Kevin Lankinen was the first star, second star, and third star of that game, the way the Canucks played in that one. And the Bruins were terrific. They just they just couldn't solve Lankinen.
Bruins and Vancouver Canucks late Saturday night. Earlier in the evening Saturday night, we've got Hockey East action coming up on NESN as well. Merrimack taking on Northeastern. Earlier, our buddy Billy Jaffe had an opportunity to talk with Merrimack associate head coach Dan Jewell.
And yes, we got an opportunity to talk with associate head coach from Merrimack, Dan Jewell. Dan, first of all, how you doing? We're in the middle of the season right now. It's kind of that funky time. Kids are looking forward to a little break. On the other hand, hockey is also still a major factor. So it's kind of a tough time, isn't it, to be a coach?
Yeah, in a way, for sure. We have finals week this week, so our guys are dealing with that. We had to make sure practice time was set so everybody could be there, which doesn't seem to be a problem, which is an anomaly, honestly, this time of year. So that's great. And frankly, I think it's exciting. We have one game before a little break here, and it's a Hockey East game, and something that I believe the group will be very excited for.
Yeah, at times, or this time of year, often we see non-conference games, and I know you guys had some last weekend. You split with Alaska Anchorage. How nice is it to have a Hockey East game? Because I got to imagine it adds focus to, again, a week that can be tough at times.
Yeah, every game in college hockey is now important and challenging. The parity's never been higher, but our league's awesome. And you come play at Merrimack, and you play in this league to play league games, and this is an awesome one. We have a 1-game weekend against a conference opponent, and I like to call it a football week, right? You got one game and you got one opponent, and it's a big one. So yeah, very exciting.
Very excellent. Tell me about your team so far. I know that you probably haven't won as much as you'd like, but again, you get the split last week. You're in a brutally tough league, and I know that you've had a lot of change on this team. Where are you at? What you like most about this team, Coach, and also where you need to see some more improvement?
Yeah, I would be lying if I didn't say that we're dealing with a ton of adversity for a lot of reasons. First of all, naturally, we had a lot of turnover. We had an older team last year. And then we were hit with a ton of injuries, and it's one thing to have a couple; it's another thing to have a handful. But with that said, young guys have gotten a lot of opportunity early, and hopefully that's going to play out very well down the stretch. They played in significant roles; they played a lot of minutes, and now we got to piece it together, making sure it comes to wins at the end of games. We've had moments. Now we got to get 60 minutes together consistently.
One area that you had significant injuries, and this is an understatement, to begin the year was goaltending. Crazy stuff. You needed we'll call him third, fourth string goaltender, manager to come play for you. But now Max Lundgren has seemingly taken, he's played 10 games for you so far. So where are you at with your goaltending? And I don't know if we have enough time here to go into everything that you guys went through, but pretty crazy stuff early on in the season for you guys.
Yeah, that was one that kind of got on the national college hockey stage as far as getting an equipment manager in to play a game at the beginning of the year. But where we sit now, we have 3 very capable goalies, and that's unique. Ryan Kais came in as maybe identified as our 3 to start the year, and he's played some good hockey. Won last weekend, so we're in a spot where we're hoping somebody goes and grabs it, right? Max has played some good hockey. He's had a big win at Mankato and against UConn, and Mills won at UConn as well. So we have 3 goaltenders that are very capable. And similar to our team, we need guys to go ahead and grab the reins and say, this is my net, this is our game, this is the position I'm going to have on this team. And that goes beyond the position. But we like our 3 guys. Obviously, having one that's rolling hot would be fantastic. We've had a situation where we've had 2 guys go back and forth last couple of years, which has gone well as well. So we're not opposed to anything as long as they're keeping the puck in front of them.
A young player that has scored some goals for you, and there's some relationship ties to the Boston Bruins, is sophomore forward David Sacco. All goals, 7 points on the season. Nephew of interim Bruins head coach Joe Sacco. His father David played at BU and then the NHL, and also 94 Olympic team. Where have you seen the growth in this young player's game so far, Coach?
Yeah, he's a great story as far as taking advantage of opportunity, right? He actually wasn't in to start the year in the lineup, and injuries have forced some things to happen. And and maybe he should have been in because of how well he's performed, and specifically his line, the Luke Weiland, Ryan O'Connell, David Sacco. They've simply given our team an identity that the rest of our guys hopefully can latch on to. I think they have at times, and David just played a very deliberate, hard, direct game. It's translated into offense, and that's got to be our team. And I give David a ton of credit for staying persistent, having the right approach, and being ready to attack every time he's hopped over the wall over the last handful of weeks. It's been great to see.
All right, so coming up Saturday night on NESN, Northeastern. As we mentioned earlier, it's the last game before the break. Then you'll be real busy coming after that. Tell me what you'd like to see from an X&O perspective against a Northeastern team.
Yeah, uber talented team, and a team you would like to keep out in the middle of the rink, to be honest. I think that's what you want to do against any opponent. But a team that has the stick skill and the ability to make plays in transition, you'd love to keep them out of the middle of the rink to prevent playmaking and transition offense. But as a whole, I think our team identity will help do that and play Merrimack hockey. I think that's got to be our goal for the game and the weekend, beyond specific X's and O's, which we could go into great detail about in a lot of different ways. But our team identity has to be established for 60 minutes, and that's going to help us find success.
All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us, Associate Coach Dan Jewell. We know that you're busy this week, getting ready for a lot of different things. Thanks for the time, and good luck this week. And look forward to having you, Merrimack, and the team on NESN.
Billy, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And remember, men's Hockey East action coming up Saturday night on NESN, Merrimack and Northeastern, sort of the pregame show before the pregame show before the Bruins and the Vancouver Canucks. Judd, let's go around the National Hockey League a little bit. And I don't want to channel Agent Alan Walsh here when I say this, but just as an observer, I didn't love how the New York Rangers treated the Jacob Trouba situation. The Rangers and Trouba, in the course of contract negotiations, negotiated a no-trade clause. Over the summer, there was talk that they'd like to deal him. He said, I'm going to invoke my no-trade clause, which they negotiated. I don't want to go anywhere. My family doesn't want to go anywhere. I'm not going to approve a trade. Well, as the season goes on, the Rangers have problems. Chris Drury's trying to figure out how does he fix things here. And he wants to trade Jacob Trouba, their captain. And oh, by the way, the third consecutive team captain to be traded by the Rangers during the season. So they go to Trouba and they say, you either approve the trade or we're going to put you on waivers. And whoever picks you is where you're going to go. You don't have a choice here. That feels a little bit like circumventing the bylaws of the National Hockey League to me.
So, Dale, I think 2 points. I think first and foremost, I think you and Alan Walsh have it right that Chris Drury could have handled this a lot better. And I think that what you're seeing from the Rangers in the big picture, and this also goes back to the way that they've handled Barclay Goodrow, and they told him an hour beforehand, this was a guy that they had signed to a multi-year deal. You're going on waivers. And off to San Jose he went. That I think the way Chris Drury has dealt with the Goodrow situation, the Trouba situation, Chris Kreider's name was put out there publicly. Why did you have to put Chris Kreider's name out there? This is going to be a guy, his number is going to be hanging in the rafters. Why is that out there publicly? I think that what you're seeing and the way that Chris Drury has dealt with his team and dealt with his players has manifested itself on the ice. However, to your point about Alan Walsh talking about circumventing the salary cap, and, we had this conversation earlier. My dad was a lawyer. My wife's a lawyer. These, unfortunately, are things that you negotiate. So there are two different things in the National Hockey League. There's a no trade clause and there's a no move clause. And the no move. All right,
explain the difference for people who don't know.
Okay, so this is the difference. No trade is pretty emblematic. I can't trade you to X number of teams. Some guys have a full no trade. Some guys have a limited no trade where you can trade them to 15 teams or 5 teams, whatever the case may be. For a no move clause, that means not only can you not trade me, but you can't waive me. And there are two different contracts that are given out around the National Hockey League. And that's why You pay guys like Alan Walsh to negotiate these things on your behalf. Now, maybe I don't know why guys choose, like if it were me, I want the no move clause every time because GMs can do this. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with what Jacob Trouba did. He negotiated, he worked hard to earn himself this contract and the provisions that are in it. So as a result, I don't have to take a trade to a place that I don't want to go to. I negotiated that with you. So in that sense, I understand where Alan is coming from, but this is what you negotiated, and these are the two differences between the clauses. But the other thing I want to go back to, since we're talking about Chris Drury, so this is the second time Jacob Trouba was going to be moving teams. He wanted out of Winnipeg, the team that originally drafted him. It was well known he was not going to sign, but the general manager there didn't threaten him with waivers. He decided, not only did he decide to move him, but he moved him to a place where his wife, who's a doctor and wanted to study, where she could pursue what she needed and what he wanted. He put him in that place. And, and the Rangers, they sent him a first-round pick and Neil Pionk, that first-round pick you saw last night in Ville Heinola. But the general manager there didn't cause such a stir that it completely undermined his team. I can't say the same for Chris Drury. I know that we say it all the time. Great game, lousy business. But I wonder to myself, Dale, and I don't know how you feel, was there a better way for Chris Drury to handle that with the people that are involved, understanding how that it would be received in the room?
I mentioned that the Rangers have now traded 3 consecutive team captains during the season. First of all, I wonder about their decision-making process in deciding who to put the C on. But second of all, you come to the other, perhaps more difficult question: do I take the C off of a guy who I think is being affected by all of these rumors or stories about whether I'm going to move him or not?
That's never fun, and we've seen that around the National Hockey League with a number of teams. We just came from Winnipeg, and the Jets had to do that with Blake Wheeler, and that was sort of an awkward situation before they ultimately parted with him. But I loved Truma's comments after the trade. I think, just to paraphrase, he said it's a rite of passage to be fired at MSG.
Happens to the best of them, I guess. Talking about nightmare seasons, and there are a bunch of teams who are probably not performing to the levels they would expect, and the Bruins would candidly admit that they're one of those. But there's nothing going on in Boston like is going on in Nashville right now. The Predators have now got an 8-game losing streak, and it doesn't look like anything's going to happen to change it.
Oh, boy, Dale. So the Bruins were down there early in the season. I think we referenced that. The Bruins, their first extended road trip, they went Colorado, Utah, Nashville. And I have a hard time explaining what's going on with the Nashville Predators, especially with the signings that they made during the offseason. But I go back, and since I'm thinking about this now, one of the things that Barry Trotz, I love Barry Trotz. His quote was, on July 1st, we're playing fantasy hockey. On October 1st, we're playing hockey for real. And just because you get these star players and bring them into your lineup, and I'm talking about Stamkos, Marchand, and Shea, and this was already a really good team last year, a very competitive team, that doesn't automatically make everything better. And this is why when I think free agency hits and we're approaching the trade deadline, and we can probably have this conversation later, everybody wants some star player, you want to bring that guy into your room, and you think, okay, the way he played there is going to be the way he plays here. And that's not always the case, because if you bring in said star player, let's take Steven Stamkos as an example. Well, how does that change everybody else's role on the team? How does that change the ice time that he's getting on the team? How does that change the voices in the room and how they're received? That's why a lot of teams are hesitant, is not the right word, but I think they think very closely about bringing in big personalities and star players at the trade deadline. If you think back, what was the big move that the Bruins made at the 2011 trade deadline? Do you remember who they brought in? Rich
Yeah, it was not what
Peverley.
you'd expect. And at the time, everybody in Boston was going, who?
Rich Peverley. I know the big name was Thomas Kaberle, but Rich Peverley was the guy who made the difference. Those are the guys who I think in many ways, and you can point to so many different players, both forwards, defensemen, that have been brought in. It's not this big, highfalutin name. It's this one guy who really fits everything and makes your team go in a way that they didn't in the past. So is that taking place in Nashville in the bigger picture? Maybe. They might be a better team next year, and it might take a full year to figure this whole thing out. And I'll be very interested to see how Barry Trotz handles this. And his guy, Andrew Burnett, behind the bench, who I really, really like.
Tuesday night, Nathan MacKinnon had a goal and 4 assists for 5 points. He reached the 600 career assist plateau in that game as well. This guy looks right now that if I was voting, I'd say he's the favorite to win his second straight Hart Trophy.
Oh, he's really good. And they've experienced so many massive losses early in the season. When the Bruins went out to play him early in the season, Dale, they were a shell. Yes, they had MacKinnon and Rantanen and Makar, but then as you look down the roster, and we weren't doing the game, who are these guys?
Yeah.
And they changed out both of their goaltenders during the course of the year. You might see that at the end of a season, but I'd have to really go back and look and maybe ask the National Hockey League, when's the last time a team changed not one, but both of its goalies during the regular season to see if they can get themselves back on track. I love Nathan MacKinnon and the will that he plays with. He not only does he bring the team into the battle, but he just brings the entire battle to the opponent. The way he plays, it's like watching a dragster on the ice. He and Connor McDavid are very different players and both at the very top of the National Hockey League. But I love watching Nathan MacKinnon and the way he plays and how much I know Marcy likes to joke. I just love watching him get mad, and he gets mad all the time, every night, and you can see it on the ice.
Judd, it was fun talking hockey with you. I know Adam Pellerin will be back in this spot as he's supposed to be sometime soon, but I hope we get a chance to visit again later on in the year.
Dale, I got to tell you, it's a treat having you back on board. There haven't been many of us who have called the Bruins full-time on television. As it was described to me, it's a small dinner table, and I'm glad to be at the table with you.
You're the 8th, my friend. There's only 8 of us. And we'll be watching, of course, on Thursday night in Seattle. Judd, thanks for taking a few minutes to join us.
Oh, Dale, all the best.
Judd Sirott joining us from Seattle, where the Bruins take on the Kraken on Thursday. You've been watching the Hockey Hub. If you like what you hear, then make sure to like and subscribe to the show. Hockey Hub can be found on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and wherever else podcasts are found. Adam Pellerin back in this spot the next time the Hockey Hub comes your way. Judd and I will be with you for Thursday's game in Seattle against the Kraken. Thanks for joining us, and enjoy the hockey games, everybody.